I am not Andrew Yang, for those who couldn't tell. I appreciate that. So my name is Zach Grauman. I ran Andrew's campaign in the 2020 presidential, which was fun. And thank you. And I asked Twitter before I come out, I'm like, well, we're performing at a comedy club, so I need a joke. I didn't have one, so I asked Twitter for a dad joke, and I'm going to read it to you. I am very prepared. Did you hear about the anti-vax nanny? Her name is Mrs. Doubtpfizer. Oh, horrible, right? Oh, thank you. Just wanted to break the ice. How are we doing tonight? We good? All of it? All right. I'll do a quick story and introduce the man of the hour. A quick story. It was 2017. It was right after Donald Trump had won the election. Ooh, we're in California. Yes, we are. And I was at this dinner in Manhattan, kind of a douchey, pretentious dinner with like 14 rich people or so. And Andrew Yang kind of parachuted in and gave this talk. He talked about automation, how it's taking away American jobs. He talked about that's the reason why Donald Trump won. And he talked about our need for universal basic income, he called it. So we need to give everybody $1,000 a month. Woo, look at this. This is a great crowd. I'm warming them up for you, Andrew. Don't worry. And he said at this dinner, he said, and I'm running for president in 2020. And everybody in the room, like, we all had the same reaction. He's like, I'm running for president. We're all like, of America? Like, of the country? That's unthinkable, you know? Like, you're unknown, you never run before. That's kind of a big job. You never really done the whole politics thing before. This is ridiculous. But for some reason, this resonated with me at the time. And looking back, the reason was actually really simple. Because Andrew Yang was right. He was right, yeah, he was. And so I took the job as Andrew Yang's campaign manager. I was like, Andrew, I want to join. He's like, great, you're my campaign manager. Awesome. What does that mean? I don't know. And it was a bit of a roller. It was up and down. We were ignored for a while. And then once they started paying attention, they just made fun of us. They laughed. But slowly but surely we grew. We made the debate stage. We did the first debate. We did not do very well. But then the second debate, we did better, and we kept doing better. And bigger crowds, and it was a crucible, if you will. You know, I joke with Andrew that I've yelled at him worse than I have my closest family members, right? It's that sort of relationship. And when we dropped out, it was hard. But after he dropped out of that race in February, COVID hit. And then what happened? Everybody from Nancy Pelosi to Donald Trump to Mitt Romney to the freaking Pope was all about cash relief. Was all about stimulus checks. Was all about giving people money. An idea that was unthinkable was now just mainstream political thought. And actually today, we passed the Earned Child Tax Credit in the United States, which is a version of universal basic income. And it's because, as unthinkable as it was, Andrew Yang was right. And now here we are. Yeah, thank you. Woo-hoo! And here we are. Andrew Yang wants to start a third party. And you've all seen it because you're here. And what have you seen? Everybody from the left to the right, you're like, that's unthinkable, you can't do that. But we know, or at least I know, and I believe at the end of this evening you'll know. Now once again, Andrew Yang is right. So guys, it is my great privilege to introduce to you tonight, man of the hour, someone who we have been through hell and back together. Someone who I've called a boss, or I've called a colleague, and I will say from the bottom of my heart, one of my best friends in the entire world. The legendary 1 in a million, Mr. Andrew Yang. Let's give it up, folks.
campaign early on, oh my gosh, were they true believers? Because that must have been the most inadvisable decision at that point. Like, no one joined the Andrew Yang campaign being like, this is going to be my ticket to Capitol Hill. It was all about trying to do the right thing. And I have to say, San Francisco is a very, very special place for me personally for the campaign. I'm going to go way, way back. My parents met at UC Berkeley, and my brother's named after the Lawrence Observatory. So I used to joke that my parents must have gotten, a little busy. I'm sure they didn't. They're very, very, well behaved. And I got mistaken all the time for a Californian. And I gotta say, I took it as like a real little flattery every time. Because I was like, well, they think I'm one of the cool Asians. And you'll remember when I was running for president, it was like California tech billionaire Andrew Yang, and then my wife was like, where the hell's this $1 billion they speak of? You've been hiding this from me? So I do feel connected to San Francisco and the Bay Area, and that was all borne out during our campaign. I thought Zach was going to tell the story, but I'll share it. So we have events, he's going to laugh right now. So we have events. We have rallies, this Humanity First tour, they're relatively modest events. And then we have a rally here in San Francisco, and then we're in our rental vehicle on the way there, and then there's all this traffic. And we're like, oh shit, we're gonna be late to our rally. Like, what's this traffic about? What's this traffic about? And then we saw a Yang sign in one of the cars, and we were like, this is our traffic. Like, that's why, like, there are actually people. How many of you were there for that rally? So you all remember, that was the first rally that deserved the name rally of the presidential campaign, and that was you all, San Francisco. That was the Bay Area. I think this place has always understood my campaign at a more instinctive level, because this is the part of the country that defines the future. You all are ahead of the curve. People can say things that seem fantastic in other parts of the country, but to you, they're common sense. A guy talking about AI and technology, completely new to American politics, but in your case, you're like, oh, I work in that industry. I have friends who work in that industry. So it struck you as something that we should have been talking about for years and years. Is that right? But like Zach said, there weren't many people early on who were boosting the Yang presidential campaign. And I'm going to tell a couple of stories about the early days. So, I was on a panel with a guy named Michael Tubbs. Y'all know who Michael Tubbs is? Mayor of Stockton, California? Yeah. So we were on a panel together, and then he says, hey, we should be looking at piloting cash relief. And I say, we should just give everyone in the country $1,000 a month. And at the end of the panel, he comes to me and whispers in my ear and says, Andrew, you can say shit I could never get away with. Because of a young black mayor went around saying, should give everyone $1,000, come on. You're all laughing and throw him out. But if the magical Asian man from the future comes in and says, AI, robots are coming, give everyone $1,000 a month, then people are like, oh, maybe we should hear this man out. So that was kind of the role that I took on. But those early days, like Zach said, were really not very easy. And one of the experiences I documented in the book was I'd go to my kid's birthday party and another dad would ask me, so what do you do for work? And if I said, I'm running for president, it would seem downright ridiculous or insane. So I would try and deflect the question, be like, oh, I'm in policy. It's like, oh, I wrote a book, or da-da-da. And they'd be like, no, what do you do? And so at some point I'd be like, I'm a presidential candidate. I'm running for president. And that would give rise to a half-an-hour conversation. And at the end of the half-an-hour conversation, it would actually not be like, sign me up. It would be like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, good luck with that. So then, of course, I'd be like, oh, a baby, I'm not sure I want to go to my kid's birthday. So those are the early days. Zach and I in a small office with a number of true believers. And we just kept grinding and grinding until eventually we hit our stride. We hit our stride because some of the people who are here like Pam and Bill and other people who believed in the campaign early on. And it was through champions like you all that what seemed out of the box or ahead of its time started to seem like common sense and something that more and more Americans should consider. That presidential campaign was a real journey for me. When I was trying to figure out whether to run, I had a fairly simple analysis, which is, okay, like, what are my downsides and what's the upside? So the downsides were time away from my family, opportunity costs, and possible total public humiliation. So the downsides, right? And then the upsides were help our country understand what was happening to us, advance universal basic income as a policy solution, and potentially accelerate the end of poverty in our time. And I looked at the minuses and the pluses, and I said, well, you have to do that. Am I right, San Francisco? And thanks to some of the people here in this room, we did it. We genuinely helped mainstream universal basic income and accelerate the end of poverty in our time. And that was my mission for those 3 years. And I was like a hammerhead shark during that time. What I mean is I had one mission. It was like, the only thing that was going to stop me from this mission was literally just like if there was trouble in my marriage. It's like, as long as everyone was cool, like this is happening. I tell people, it's like I have 2 jobs. Accelerate the end of poverty and stay married. So during this time, I did approximately 0 reflection. It was all about just like mission to mission. Every day would be media interviews and events. The most common question I got from journalists was this: are you serious? And like so many other questions, it was a trap. Because if you say, no, I am not serious, then it's fuck you, you're ridiculous, and like, you know, I'm now gonna ridicule you. If you say, yes, I am serious, you seem unreasonable, and fuck you, and I'm gonna ridicule you. Right? Right? And so I would answer some version of, there are multiple versions of victory, there are different ways that I can win, we have like different goals with this campaign. You know, and it was that kind of thing times 100, times 1,000 every single day. And you had to really have this kind of helmet on. You know, I had to have a hard hat on, so I was very, very single-minded. I did 0 reflection. I wish I jotted some stuff down. And during the campaign's rise, I began to feel more and more energized and invigorated, because imagine being a relatively anonymous person who then showed up to rallies of hundreds and then thousands. And then thousands of volunteers showed up in Iowa in January of 2020, including Bill and Pam. How many of you were in Iowa during the campaign? Where the fuck were the rest of you? Did you just hear what I was saying? Chance to eradicate poverty? We were like, yeah, let someone else handle it. So I started the campaign saying, we get 40,000 Iowans on board with this vision. We can accelerate the end of poverty. And so that's where we fought it out, in Iowa. January 2020, bus tour, just crisscrossing it. So much energy, so much love. One kid came and busted his kneecap, knocking door to door, and then he was like getting like wheeled around. No, I mean, it was really, really hardcore. And during that period, I felt like one of those characters in one of those medieval movies, where you know, they're like horseback, it's like a charge, and then it's like my hair was long and flowing. Everything was in slow motion. It was like, you know, charged up, like screaming at the top of your lungs. Like that was what the final days of the Iowa campaign were like. I am the only campaign in the history of American politics to win the Iowa youth poll and not win the actual thing. If they just cut off voting at age 20, I'd be the president of the United States right now. We spent $7 million on the airwaves in Iowa. Like that was this magical, magnificent charge. And then when the voting started and we got less than we'd hoped for, it was like the horses disappeared. It was like you're on horseback going, and then all of a sudden you're like on the ground, like looking for your helmet. You're like, all right, what happened? What happened? And so then we went to New Hampshire, fought it out, and Zach was in the room when we started thinking about, okay, like what does the end of this campaign look like? And when I first heard even someone in my team consider the end of the campaign, it hit me like a punch to the gut. Because imagine grinding like we had for like years and years, and I was just going 100 miles an hour and the rest of it. And then thinking that we were going to actually fall short and stand up and say that was the case, it was just something I never allowed myself to consider. This is the first event where I'm actually talking a bit about this decision. It's like I thought I was going to let everyone down if we stopped. And so my team had to try and lay out for me, it's like, look, like what is actually going to advance this case the most? You were continuing, you were stopping, and they made a case where eventually I became persuaded that if we didn't hit our goals in New Hampshire, that suspending the campaign was the right thing to do. I said, let's go to New Hampshire and let's fight it out. Campaign till midnight every day. But then when we didn't hit our goals there, we decided to stop the campaign. And that was a very, very tough day. We then flew directly to Nevada, where people were crying, who were like comforting each other. And it was only during this time that I started to reflect on the journey that I'd just been on. And I wanted to try and catalog it. That's the book that you all have in front of you. Like I wanted to figure out what the heck had just happened. And I have to say too, there's like this piece of me that was like, hey look, this is my goal, we finish it. And there was part of me that was like, if this is my epitaph, like ran for president, helped advance universal basic income, like I'm cool with that, you know what I mean? Like mission accomplished, more or less. But then you wake up the next day and you're like, well, I'm still here. Probably still here. And I thought at the time, when I started my presidential campaign, that the entire issue was that people had not heard of universal basic income. And that if people heard about universal basic income, that people would get behind it and then problem solve. It turns out, San Francisco, I was dead wrong. Because now, virtually everyone knows about universal basic income. A poll just came out the other day that said 2/3 of Americans are for it. So why don't we have it? This was what I was trying to unpack when I decided to sit down and catalog not just my own experiences, but also this feeling that we're stuck, this feeling that we're dysfunctional, this feeling that our government does not respond to us, the people of this country. How many of you have felt that? Oh yeah, we all can feel that. And so I tried to figure out why we feel this way. Like why do we feel like we're not actually going to be able to make meaningful progress? And I figured out that we're not going to make meaningful progress because our system is not designed for us to make meaningful progress. So one of the big ideas I want to impart unto you all today, San Francisco, is this. We're at a point in American life where if everyone does the reasonable thing according to their incentives, we're fucked. That's why we feel stuck. Now, what do I mean? I've now met dozens of members of Congress, many of them very good, noble, well-intentioned public servants. What is the overall national approval rate for U.S. Congress right now? It's about 28%. It's kind of gone between like 21, 25, 28%. It's pretty damn low. Like imagine if your kid came home with like 28% of the test. Like Asian or not, like that's a problem. So that's where most of us, are in terms of Congress as a body, in terms of what they're doing or not doing. What is the re-election rate for individual members of Congress? 92%. That's even being conservative. Is that like 94, 95? It's like 92%. That's a better win-loss record than the 2016 Warriors. No, I mean that's one of the best teams of all time. I could have chosen the Jordan Bulls, but here we are. So the incumbents are like Steph Curry and Draymond and Clay at their prime. And then whoever challenges them is like the Memphis Grizzlies circa 2016. The Grizzlies are actually now pretty good, so I could choose a shittier team, but... So, wow, it's rough. Someone that's like the Lakers. This gentleman just shouted out Lakers. It's funny. I could run down that track, but I won't. So how is it that 3 out of 4 of us can be upset about what Congress is doing or not doing, but they have this incredibly high re-election rate? 92%. That's really, really high. Even if you're Asian, it's not that bad. So it turns out that their incentives are driving them toward the extremes, and here's why. In 83% of these congressional districts around the country, the seat is either very blue or very red. So if they get to the general election, they win. So what is the game for them? What is the thing that they're concerned about? What they're concerned about is getting challenged in a primary by someone who's generally more extreme than them in their own party. So on the right, it would be, like you can imagine them in your mind. It's like the folks who are even more extreme, and then on the left, it's also the same. So your incentives are not then to be reasonable. Your incentives are to placate and please the 10 to 20% most extreme voters in your district. And I'm going to say, San Francisco, some of the people on one side of this equation are really, really weird. You know what I mean? Like, you're like the 10 to 20% most extreme voters. I mean, you're not talking, like, I don't think they're here today, let's put it that way. So these are the incentives that we put in place for 83% of our legislators. And a Republican senator said to me the other day that we benefit more politically by keeping an issue around than resolving it. Now, what do I mean? I'm going to use an example. You remember when Marco Rubio proposed immigration reform of a bipartisan nature a number of years ago? You don't remember that? Raise your hand if you remember that. If you don't remember that, it's because he said, haha, just kidding, like a week later. And it's sort of like, well, you don't remember that too? Yeah, and why is that? It's because he started getting shit by people in his own party. He was like, no, never mind, no bipartisan proposal here, and it's like kind of went back to his corner. Because if you try and compromise with the other side, you're actually more likely to have your job security threatened or jeopardized than if you just stay on your side, blame the other side. By the way, you can raise more money this way, you can get votes this way. The incentives are for you to actually keep the problem around. Does this seem like a reasonable summary of where we are as a country right now? The system is not designed to work. The system is designed to reward people heading to the extremes and blaming the other side. It's one reason why now we are more polarized than ever. Ever. We have higher levels of political stress right now in this country than we did before the actual Civil War. 42% of Democrats and Republicans regard the other side as evil or their mortal enemies. So social media, the incentives then start with our politics, but then on top of it, you have media organizations that then separate us into ideological camps and profit by doing so. And then social media pours gasoline on the whole thing. And that's why we feel the way we feel. We're being set up not to actually come together and make meaningful progress. We're being set up for political violence, strife, and eventual Civil War 2.0. How many of you think that's hyperbolic and an exaggeration? Clap if you think that's pretty fucking spot on. So this is what I was figuring out. You're talking about billions of dollars in financial incentives and the job security of the vast majority of your politicians, driving them in these directions. This system is not designed to work. So what the heck is the answer, right? Have I depressed you? Have I scared you? It's like, you're like, oh no. Yeah. Like, more drinks, please. Believe it or not, San Francisco, I have found the answer. And the answer comes from the great state of Alaska. Now, if you've been a longtime Yang supporter, when you hear Alaska, what do you think? Oil dividend, what's the oil of the 21st century? Data. Did you get your data check? Right? So that's where you think I'm going when I say Alaska, but it's not that. Something totally different. Is this somehow Alaska managed to find the answer again? Alright, so raise your hand if you heard of Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, who's been in the news lately. Raise your hand, or clap if you heard of her. If you have not heard of her, congratulations. You have a life. You're not paying attention to politics. You're not like keeping tabs on the Capitol Hill comings and goings. I envy you, your mental health, your relative optimism. But if you've heard of Senator Lisa Murkowski, you know that her recent claim to fame is that she is the only Republican senator who voted to impeach Donald Trump, who is also up for re-election in 2022. The handful of other Republican senators who decided to impeach Donald Trump are not up for re-election. They're like, maybe they'll forget by the time 2024 comes that I made this vote. Lisa Murkowski's the only one that's like, oh yeah, I'm up. I'm up, and I think we should impeach the guy. Her approval rating among Alaskan Republicans now stands at 6%. Yeah, it's political suicide to go against Trump in the Republican Party. So why did she do it? How? It turns out that Alaska last year changed its process from closed party primaries, where Senator Murkowski was going to have to run the gauntlet with the 10 to 20% most extreme Republican voters in the state of Alaska. Can you imagine that group? They just switched that process to open primaries and ranked choice voting, which you here in California are kind of familiar with. So now instead of having to go through the 10 to 20%, she can take her case to the entire electorate in Alaska and try and get 50.1% to say, you know what, I'm an independent voice, I have my own judgment, I have fought for you people of Alaska, I'm a good person. Generally more coalition building and reasonable and rational. I think I'm going to voting and actually very, very positive for candidates from what I've seen. So Alaska made this switch. California is sort of halfway there. We'd love you to have more than 2 candidates get through because you have more points of view emerge. And all of this is left to the states, in large part because of our Constitution and the founding design. So if you look at the US Constitution, how many words will you find about political parties?
0.
0. The founders hated political parties. George Washington was like, no, 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 anti-partisanship. Like, I'll even step down before, we start heading in that direction. John Adams, 2 great parties would be an evil upon the land. 1780. And I think he'd be pumped about this situation. He'd be like, oh, this worked out exactly as we intended. 2 great parties, just going smash, smash, smash. Making everyone crazy, getting nothing done. So the founders would be shocked and horrified by where we've been this last 150 years. They'd see this as like a waking nightmare. It is their waking nightmare. And this duopoly has a very, very crucial design flaw, which is that if one of the 2 major parties succumbs to bad leadership, there are no more safeguards. I mean, you have like one leader come in, run roughshod over one of the 2 parties, and everyone in that party is like, well, guess this is our guy now, because we're heading this direction, because hey, it's my job, and by the way, even if I have issues with him, better us than the other team. That's a very, very vulnerable system, San Francisco. You know what I mean? Like, we're actually seeing and experiencing it right now. Yeah, we lived it, and we may live it again. So there are people who see me in the news lately, and it's like, doesn't Andrew realize that Donald Trump is coming? Of course I fucking realize he's coming. I spent 3 years trying to help beat him. And we should be concerned. We should be concerned about what his return is going to mean. I'm going to digress for just a minute. So this is like, I'm going to put my CNN cap on. I don't have a CNN cap anymore. I'm just going to put it on. All right, Republican field. Donald Trump, 65 to 80% approval ratings among Republicans. Ron DeSantis saying privately will not run against Trump. Nikki Haley publicly saying will not run against Trump. Donald Trump's opponents are likely to be Mike Pence, Chris Christie, maybe Larry Hogan. What do you all think? You're like, yeah, I don't think that's going to go any of those guys. But yeah, Trump's going to roll through that. On the other side, Democrats look up and say, incumbent President Joe Biden has already defeated Trump once. What's the issue with Joe, if there is an issue? We'll be 81 years old. Circa 2034. So then, they think, okay, how about Kamala, our vice president? Oh, wow, I'm in California, and people don't seem too pumped about So I'm just going to use like publicly available numbers. Kamala polls 4 to 5 points worse than Joe. So then where do you go? So it's not like at that point the Democrats can just turn shit and say, like, we're going to have this third person. You have to have a competitive primary. And they're not going to want to have a competitive primary with the sitting president and a vice president, so it's going to lead you back to Joe, who has also been telling people that he wants to run again. So you probably have Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, the sequel, in 2024, combined age 158. Oh, and there's not a better sign of like our system's like, not able to refresh itself. Well, that's pretty much it. So this is the likely contest coming down the way. I know people are thinking this, like, oh. So what is a project? If you look around the world, other democracies have more parties than 2. I'm going to suggest to you all that if you were to set up any system, you wouldn't want one party, you wouldn't want 2 parties, you would want at least 3 parties. This is common sense, you know what I mean? I'm going to suggest that you probably don't even stop at 3. You look at the UK, how many parties they have, you have no idea, but I'll tell you. The UK has 5 parties. Germany, 7. Sweden, 8. The Netherlands, 18. I was at an event and this Dutch guy was like, oh yeah, we do have 18 parties. And it's like, great. I was like, can you name them? He's like, no. But he's like, well, I'm really glad they're there. If you have 5 parties or 7 parties and one party succumbs to bad leadership, it's a problem, but it's not like a country-threatening problem. It's just party 7 has lost its mind, and we'll hope they get it, get their acts together, and then the rest of us will keep doing business. And in order for party 7 to have control of the agenda, they'd have to get 3 other parties on board. You all think that this would make more sense? We are experiencing the greatest design flaw in the history of the world. True, like we're on the verge of it. And our project over the next 13 months is to race around the country and try and do what they did in Alaska for Senator Lisa Murkowski in other states around the country, because it turns out that 24 states have ballot initiatives that enable us to make this change if just enough people get together and do it. What do you all think? So this is the answer, San Francisco. The future of democracy rests on your shoulders. I know it's a lot of pressure. You're like, oh shit, I came to a comedy club, say a book talk, and I walk out with the future of democracy in my hands. But that is the way this is going down. It turns out that's the responsibility you're now inheriting, just because you're people who now understand what the situation is and what the real solution is. We have to take this message to the rest of the country as quickly as possible. Are you with me? This is the project of our day. This is what the Forward Party is about. You can be a registered Democrat, independent, registered Republican, doesn't matter. Anyone who wants the system to work better should be for these reforms. We only have one shot on goal. We have one cycle, November 22, to try and get this stuff right. Imagine if we were to unlock a critical mass, let's call it 6 U.S. senators from the perverse incentives that right now are holding them back in some cases. I'm going to suggest to you all that 6 U.S. senators being liberated might be the difference between democracy surviving and not surviving. You know what I mean? Like, that's genuinely a project. Imagine 6 more Senator Murkowskis who are like, you know what, I kind of like this democracy thing. Like, maybe we should keep it. Maybe we should protect secretaries of state from being fired for political reasons. But, like, these things are right now on the table. Just need a couple of movers to come our way. This is the plan, this is the vision. Now, you all being here today means that you are probably a little bit unusual, and here's what I mean. When I started running for president, people would talk to me, particularly people who are in politics, and be like, Andrew, you are very, very bad at this. And what they meant was that I didn't communicate in political terms, that I wasn't telling like emotional stories, I wasn't tossing out issue-laden red meat or blue meat to a particular audience. People didn't know when to applaud. They were just like, it was like automation, 4 million jobs, robots, give people money. I'm okay, it's like, people here were into it. But the folks, and we'd speak to at events, we're just like, that like it was like, this is like unlike anything I've ever seen before in politics. And so what happened was, I ended up discovering a new political language of reason and facts and technology and economics and real life events and trends. And it was just the way I talk, really. I mean, it wasn't deliberate. It was like I'm going to formulate a new political language. It was just like I just went around like trying to describe the world as I saw it. And then some people who were not traditionally engaged with politics heard this and were like, oh, like, yeah, I like this guy. This is what I'm looking for. How many of you all resemble that? How many of you remember that experience? It turns out, and this is one of the big lessons from my book, aside from the fact that, again, if everyone acts reasonably, we're fucked, is that all politics are tribal. All politics are tribal. If you get Americans, and I've now talked to, as you imagine, thousands of Americans from the most rural counties in the Midwest to the biggest cities, if you get Americans together from different backgrounds, they actually agree on much, much more than you'd imagine if you just watch our news media. Where the example I've been using is look, if you sit down a conservative Republican and say, hey, think drug prices are too high? Like, oh yeah. It's like, hey, you want to stick to the drug companies? Yeah, I hate them. And then if you were to say, hey, how do you feel about socialized medicine? Like, oh, fuck that. Because if they'd heard a coded term, then all of a sudden they know to be against it. At this point, all politics is tribal. We're just separated into two tribes. The media organizations are pitting us against each other. It turns out the policy viewpoint of an American voter and their self-identified politics don't even match up. If you go to conservative Republicans and actually ask them how they feel about various things, they agree with, quote-unquote, the left on a whole lot of issues. The correlation between your policy point of view and your self-identified conservatism or progressivism is only 0.25. We imagine it's 1. We imagine it's like, oh, I'm having a policy war. We're not. We're just having tribal warfare defined by coded language, symbols, and values. This is why we have to change this dynamic. So it turns out that there's this new political language that I accidentally discovered. What percentage of Americans do you think respond to that language? This language of facts, reason, possibility, solutions, optimism. You know it's less than 51%. I'm estimating 10%. And I think that, I'm going to suggest to you all that you all are probably card-carrying members of that 10%. You know what I mean? Like the language of reason and facts and the rest of the solutions, it works on you all. It's probably one reason why you're here. But I've got tremendous news for you. If we get 10%, we win. If we get the middle 10% or the rational 10% or the optimistic 10% of this, however you want to define this group, we transform American politics and end up bringing us in a totally different direction. How many U.S. senators does it take to control the agenda? 1. The mission is not win 51 Senate seats. You win 1 Senate seat, and all of a sudden you can be in the driver's seat, just like that. I'm going to suggest to you all, we might get that 1 Senate seat November 22. If enough of us get together, we can actually make a lot of these changes I'm talking about very, very quickly. That's a product of a polarized society and a polarized system, where if you wind up in the middle, there's even a fancy name for this. It's called fulcrum theory. That if you have a polarized system, all you need is 1 or 2 spots in the middle, and then you get to control the agenda. Imagine if we had that 1 or 2 senators there where they could actually take the entire country toward various compromises. Do you think that would improve things, San Francisco? That's achievable. That's achievable by the numbers. I'm actually already talking to some of these candidates who are running in this lane and they have a chance to win. You can bet that the Forward Party and Andrew Yang, and I hope all of you, will get behind them and give them every chance to win. You want to join me in that? You want to join me in actually trying to fight to preserve this democracy in the face of disintegration? To try and resolve the real issues, not the back and forth, the they're wrong, they're terrible, but actually get to the root causes of what is driving our country to madness. That is our mission. Our mission is to take the real problems, expose them to the light. We've done it once with universal basic income. It took a little time, but now everyone's on board. We are going to do the same thing with polarization, open primaries, and ranked choice voting. Some people here are like, I don't know, Andrew, it's not as catchy. Not as catchy as giving everyone money. Don't worry. Eventually it'll be like, it'll be like dispelling the madness. Like, well, we'll just keep on working and we'll grind until we find messages that stick with every type of American, or just the 10%. This is the new vision. And Americans, I gotta say, I've been waiting for this. I get messages every single day. The most positive piece of feedback I got was yesterday at the hotel. The doorman just looked at me and said, "Hey, Yang, Forward Party," like that. And I was like, we are totally gonna fucking do this. 62% of Americans want an option, want an alternative to the two major parties. And when someone, it's like, someone said to me, it's like a choice between disintegration and managed decline is no choice at all. And those are the choices we've been left with. And when you say to them, it's like, hey, 62% of Americans want an alternative. As an entrepreneur, and a lot of you are cut from the same cloth. If you're an entrepreneur and you were in a marketplace and there were two companies and 62% of people wanted a new alternative, you'd be like, I better start a third company immediately, right? So you do that. And San Francisco, I mean, you all iterate and evolve, like industries rise, fall. I mean, sometimes a little too fast. Sometimes you're like, oh, I wish it would slow down a little bit. But in politics, it's just like, can't change. You're stuck in the mud. No, only two. The Duopoly, 150 years, terrible design, doesn't matter. You're bad, they're bad. Like that's the negativity that so many of our fellow Americans are stuck in. We have to take the same mindset of possibility and optimism. I spoke to a bunch of business leaders, and I was like, you would never accept this level of dysfunction in your firm or your industry. You would want to change like that. You'd see some massive opportunity, but then when we talk about politics, all of a sudden people are like, no. And I say to you all, San Francisco, they're wrong, and we're going to prove them wrong over the next number of months. If we work together and you join me in this, we can take this country we love and take it not left or right, but forward, which is where millions of us have been waiting to go our entire lives. Thank you all so much, San Francisco. I love you. I love being here. I love the Bay Area. You all are going to lead us into the future. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Everyone. I'm now going to take some questions, and then we're going to take photos up here on the stage. But yeah, I'll take questions. Look at that. This is a very rare, very comedy thing where all of a sudden I'll start taking questions. Is it Sky? Is that right? Sky, go ahead.
I think it's going to keep coming up. I think we're going to have this common misunderstanding. Like, if you already have open primaries and we worry about this issue, but I think isn't it more that like you have to have open primaries greater than 2 and then 5, and then ranked choice voting and have to be combined together?
So I think the question is about the fact that some places have open primaries and don't have Final Five, don't have ranked choice voting. A lot of places don't have any of this. And so a lot of the action is going to be in states that right now don't have either open primaries or ranked choice voting. And some of the states that are considering it right now are red states. I'm going to summarize something that's going on in American life right now. So we have these two sides, and the Democrats kind of represent the establishment. And the establishment is having some issues. It's like, it's not exactly humming. And the Republicans have now started to represent this anti-institutionalist fervor. They're like, tear it all down, you're all bums, you're all full of shit, like, et cetera, et cetera. So if you go into a red state and you say to voters like, hey, do you want to have open primaries so that, you know, the party establishment doesn't control everything? They're like, yeah, like that actually goes really well in red states because they don't trust their own establishment. You know what I mean? But you go to, that's how Alaska is the first place to do this, because Alaska, it's deep red, and they're just like, yeah, like power to the people. And so this message can actually transform the incentives in a lot of places that I'm going to suggest you'd want to try and change the incentives of the legislators. So that's something that I'm very excited about. Where ranked choice voting has a higher appeal right now in certain blue areas because it's kind of technocratic as a fix, but open primaries has higher appeal in red states because they just like this populist energy. In the USA, sure. Sorry, I didn't run it over.
Thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate all you're doing. You're running headfirst into the fire that is U.S. politics right now. So thank you. Talking about politics, I guess I want to press you on one thing, which is something even more upstream of our politics than these issues you're talking about in the primary process, which is something that deeply affects each of our lives at a very core level, which is money. Since 1971, when Nixon broke the gold peg, which we had, hard money, gold as money for literally thousands of years, we've had this experiment in political money since that time. And it's been used as a political football by both parties to achieve their pet projects. And so my question to you is, have you investigated this further, thought about this, try to understand the ramifications of having a base money system that is so in the hands of central bankers and politicians?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to translate. Andrew, what do you think about crypto? You can probably tell them the way I framed that. Like, I'm a cryptocurrency fan and proponent. I do think that you're going to want to have at least some rational, reasonable interaction with the government in the form of regulation and taxation. Right now, they don't understand it, and so it's very dangerous. And I said something you probably saw, which was like, if you have $1 trillion industry that could define the future, try not to screw it up. It's like a very, very basic approach. So the Forward Party is going to end up being, I think, the de facto champion of the cryptocurrency community, in large part because the cryptocurrency community really has very, very few spokespeople on Capitol Hill. And I referred a bit earlier to the age of the two likely presidential candidates in 2024. The same is true with the U.S. Congress, in part because of this almost certain re-election phenomenon that we talked about. So the average age of a member of Congress is about 59. For the Senate, it's like 64. Leadership, Nancy Pelosi, a representative, I believe, is 81. Steny Hoyer, her lieutenant, also 81. Mitch McConnell, 79. Chuck Schumer, relatively spry, 70. So if these are your policymakers, do you think they're going to be savvy to the cryptocurrency kind of community? Why are you laughing? It's like, of course not. I mean, I kind of compare it to my dad, who's alive, thank you, God. I love my dad a lot. But my dad's 83. I go to my dad and be like, hey, Dad, what do you think about what's going on with ETH or whatever? So that's like the leadership we have. And one of the things that I want to try and make it is that our politics actually refreshes itself. And one thing the Forward Party is for reasonable term limits for members of Congress. And 74% of Americans are for that. It's kind of common sense. It's like, hey, if you go there, try and get some stuff done. I'm proposing two things that should make it very reasonable. Number one, 18 years in each house. It's relatively long. It's long enough to actually organize and get things done. And two, current lawmakers are exempted, so you're all grandfathered in, no skin off your back. You know what I mean? Because asking them to vote on something that kicks them all out, bridge too far. But if you say, hey, make this happen for like the next generation of lawmakers, I'll be like, look at us lead. Let's find out we did it, everyone. We did it. You know, but then eventually they age out, the rest of it, and then you have like a system that will actually rejuvenate itself. So and one of the reasons why I think we need to do this is because they don't understand technology, AI, cryptocurrency, social media, and we're all left holding the bag. And in this case, the bag could destroy us. It's like a bag of techno TNT. You know what I mean? Yeah, you know what I mean. But yeah, love cryptocurrency, and if you imagine utopia, you end up needing a lot of the properties that cryptocurrency enables. It's like, look at that Silicon Valley tech bro. That's what Pam's saying. I'm just summarizing and quoting. Yes. Mike's coming, I think.
Hi, Andrew. I'm Chow, Vice Mayor of Cupertino. I don't know if you remember. I hosted the very tiny first get-together in Cupertino. At that time, even mentioning your name to other Democrats feels like I was risking people like, are you out of your mind? Asking me to meet with this kid.
Thank you for doing it anyway. Thank you for doing it anyway.
But I'm so amazed at your success. So I have two questions. I'm an independent. I was actually trying to see if I should join a new California party, California Common Sense Party. They were trying to collect signatures before the pandemic. So have you reached out to them? Would you possibly collaborate with them? So I'm ahead of you on the third party.
You are ahead of me.
Second question is regarding campaign finance reform. I think the reason that these candidates keep getting elected is independent expenditure. The parties can get to spend a lot of money to get them reelected. So what are your views for campaign reform so that we can get independent or the third party candidates elected?
You are amazing. Thank you. Now, anyone who runs for local office has my admiration. Some people have said to me, like, oh, running for president harder. I disagree. I think running for local office is much, much harder than running for president. Because everyone knows who you are. It's very personal. It's like literally your neighbors. And if you don't show up to something, they'll be like, where were you? Whereas you're running for president, it's like, I was in Iowa, like the rest of it. And congrats on being an independent and the rest of it. I'm happy to say that I have been in touch with the Common Sense Party here in California, Tom Campbell, who's a great guy. I've been an independent for almost 3 weeks. And I gotta say, it's been awesome. I was walking down the street the other day, someone just yelled, hey, independent. And I was like, wow, that never happened to me when I was a Democrat. I wasn't like... And the folks I've met, like Tom Campbell and like you, who are ahead of me in the independent political movement, are real patriots and people who are driven by principle, because it's a political loser to raise your hand and say, hey, I'm an independent, or hey, I want to do something with this. All of the incentives are on one side or the other. The two parties spent $2.65 billion against each other in the last just congressional races alone. And I want you all to reflect on that for a minute. Like, if one side spends $1.2 billion, the other one spends $1.45 billion, like, I mean, how much does that just cancel each other out? You know what I mean? Like, go back and be like, hey, that's like an extra $2.2 billion. Like, maybe you could have done something with that. And so if you are independent like you are, you're outside of that system, and the incentives are not there. So anyone who chooses to do that must actually feel it's very important. So why I'm so appreciative. I have to say, like, people who've been like categorizing me as somehow, like opportunity seeking, it's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, what? Like, on what planet is it like a savvy career move to like start a third party? Like, oh, like there's, you know what I mean? Like, it's like the dumbest thing. It's like you would only do it if you really thought it needed to happen. So again, let's give her a round of applause for it. So to answer the questions directly, one of the thrills of the last 3 weeks has been that most of the third-party organizations here in California and in Texas and in New York and in California have reached out to me and the Forward Party and said, let's link up. Let's join up. That's what happens when you're patriots. I'll tell you, in politics, that is not normal. In politics, is ordinarily like, oh, like, this is my thing. I love my thing. Like, who's this person? Oh, no. You know? But in this third party movement, everyone's like, let's do it. We've been grinding at this forever. We can see the duopoly is going to ruin us. Yeah, you're on board? Let's work together. Some of them, and I don't want to give anything away, but some of them are like, we'll change our name to Forward. We don't care. And so, I think people are going to be shocked at how quickly the Forward Party grows. Because all of a sudden it'd be like, what? Like on the ballot in 4 states? Like, how the hell did that happen? I know, this is really, really cooking with gas. It's fun. So the common sense right in California, I'm all for. If anyone wants to help get signatures, I think it's fantastic. And talk to Tom and I believe that they will get there. To your question, the capital structure is what we have to resolve, and this is my mission. It's so much fun. So you have this 2.65 billion on both sides, and you have people independence, and you don't have your own capital structure. You know what you also don't have? Your own media apparatus. You know what I mean? You guys notice that one too. So you're gonna love this, San Francisco. Those are the two things we're gonna build. We're gonna build a parallel political and capitalization structure that if someone tries to do something in this lane, they'll actually have resources to fight it out. And then we're gonna build a parallel media apparatus of independent voices and estimates. I know, so much fun. To try and solve the problem that you're describing.
We don't want to take care of each other, we want to take care of Americans, and I see these politicians saying, no, we're not going to put money here, so on and so forth. Like, in your opinion, why is that a thing?
What's your name, sir?
My name's Chris.
Hey, did everyone hear Chris's question? Oh, so Chris said, hey, given that we can see poverty all around us, why the heck is UBI contentious? Like, what is going on? This is maybe the biggest signal of the dysfunction that we have to remedy, Chris. So what I figured out is that the people on Capitol Hill don't actually pay any attention to how people are doing, or their constituents are. They pay attention to their incentives. And this is born out of like an Onion article. I'm not going to believe this, but the Onion genuinely profoundly influenced my thinking. So the Onion said, the American people hire high-powered lobbyists on Capitol Hill to fight for their interests. And there's like a picture of a guy in a suit and being like, with this guy, like the American people will finally have a voice. And you look up that Onion headline, and I was like, that's the funniest shit. But then I was like, wow, that would actually be a good idea. That would really work. Oh, it's true. So when you ask Chris, like, why is it that they don't seem to pay attention to like the basic problems that we can all see around us? It's because those problems don't actually have anyone on Capitol Hill representing them. If you're like a poor person trying to make ends meet, who the hell's lobbying on your behalf in Congress? So until 18 months ago, the answer was nobody. But the organization that I founded, Humanity Forward, became a lobbying organization where you're not going to believe it, but it employs like, 15 to 20 professional lobbyists on Capitol Hill, where all they do is feed congressional offices with studies and polls and reports around cash relief and the effects on families and all of this stuff. It's the most wholesome freaking lobbyist there is. And it's like a people's lobbyist, is what I jokingly call them. I love them. If that sounds good to you all, you can go to humanityforward.com and make a donation to their C4. Not tax deductible, but that's how you know it's working. We have a C3 too. It's cool. We give away money too. But that's what we're going to need, Chris, because it's the same thing with, I think, what the Forward Party is, and this may be my role in American life, is I take an idea or a policy that would actually help people that there's actually no existing lobbying interest for. You know what I mean? Like, who's lobbying for poor people in the United States of America? Turns out nobody. When we were advancing cash relief, my team was shocked, where they go to members' offices and the members are like, oh, this is the first time anyone's really talked to us about like giving people money. So it's actually very fruitful as a result. And our team's very professional. And they try and communicate things as to how the members will benefit from it. They say, look, your district loves this, it's been polled, it's going to go great. And everyone's like, oh, that's what we're going to need. Like, again, it's like another parallel incentive structure. But I've been around these politicians, and they are so institutionalized. They like whatever crazy shit you think is going on, it's one step worse than that. And part of it too is that many of them have been in DC for decades. You know, like one of the themes of my book is that like if you get institutionalized, like you stop really being a normal person. What percentage of our members of Congress are like past that point where they're not a normal person anymore? I mean, who knows? But I guarantee you it's a whole lot more than like, you know, like 50. I mean, it's like 80% of them are just totally different. I mean, I think I saw a number. It's like more than, what percentage of them are millionaires? Not that there's anything wrong with necessarily being successful, but it's like they're not like normal American. The other thing that's really confusing is like some of the word millionaires they got there and then they became millionaires, and you're like, wait, I can see your salary. Like, how the hell did this happen? This doesn't compute. You know what I mean? So Chris, that's the summary as to why it's not happening. We gotta fix it. One last question. I'm going to go to Therese because she's another elected official that is trying to make great things happen. So please introduce yourself, Therese.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. I'm Teresa Payne. I'm serving on the Fremont City Council now and running for California State Assembly in District 20. Thank you so much. And my question for you, Andrew, is what if I have made a website to promote California UBI? Which is caubi.com.
We'll have to take another question after this series, but I love caubi.com, and I want to tell you also about CalRCV and Fair Vote California. These are organizations that are trying to make ranked choice voting the norm here in your state. So if the things I'm talking about are exciting to you, pick one of these orgs and freaking sink your teeth in. You know, Forward Party, CalRCV, Fair Vote, one of these great public officials, Common Sense California, like just take one of them and just don't let it go. Be like a dog with a bone, Forward Party, All right, so I'm going to take one more question because, you know, I love Cal UBI, Teresa. Sir.
Hey, thanks for being here, by the way. Welcome to North Beach. We missed you Thursday night. Did you miss us?
I really did. I think you saw I was in the airport, all stressed out, running back and forth, being like, is there a flight to Oakland? Is there a flight to San Jose that I could catch? That will get me there by 8:30 p.m. I will accept 8:30 p.m. Anyway, sorry. Oh, we got the question? I guess we'll wrap on that. Thank you, San Francisco. I can't wait to meet you. Let's fight for this country of ours. There is still hope yet. Am I right? And we're going to bring this country the hope and the light that they need. Thank you all so much.